Hello, everyone. My name is Matt Quintana, and I'm the chair of the IBR Students Committee. I'm happy to serve alongside Sherry Richter, who is the vice chair, and Isaiah Paget, who is the secretary. IBR Students is an initiative within the Institute for Biblical Research that exists to welcome, encourage, and assist student members as they prepare to pursue biblical studies in a faith environment. Some of our goals include helping students navigate the challenges faced as a graduate student in the field of biblical studies and equipping students both for a future in the academy and for building bridges between scholarship and the church. To that end, we host regular interviews with senior scholars in the field to glean from their wisdom and experience. And in the past, we have often chosen the IBR annual lecture speakers as one of our first interviews of the new year. And so today we're delighted to be joined by Dr. Ellen Davis, who was the annual lecture speaker this past year in Boston. So with that, I'll pass it over to Sherry, who's going to give a bit of an introduction to Dr. Davis.
Thank you.
We are pleased to have Dr. Ellen F. Davis with us today, who's the Amos, Ragan, Kearns Distinguished Professor of Bible and Practical Theology at Duke Divinity School. Her research interests focus on how biblical interpretation bears on the life of faith communities and their response to urgent public issues, particularly the ecological crisis and interfaith relations. Dr. Davis earned her PhD from Yale University and has received numerous honorary degrees and awards. Her professional career has included appointments at Union Theological Seminary, Virginia Theological Seminary, Cambridge University, and finally Duke Divinity School, where she has taught now for 25 years. An accomplished author, Dr. Davis has written extensively on practical theological issues and biblical studies. Her most recent works include Opening Israel's Scriptures with Oxford University Press in 2019, Preaching the Luminous Word, Biblical Sermons and Essays with Erdmans in 2016, Biblical Prophecy, Perspectives for Christian Theology, Discipleship, and Ministry, published by Westminster in 2014, and she also has a forthcoming book with Baylor University Press titled Light Within Light, Psalms and the Arts of Insight. Dr. Davis is a lay Episcopalian and has been long active as a theological consultant within the Anglican Communion. So welcome, Dr. Davis.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Well, let's start at the beginning because we would love to hear about your journey into scholarship. So would you perhaps share with us what led you to become a professional Bible scholar and teacher and what motivates your work?
I did not intend to be a biblical scholar. I was working in religious nonprofit and I liked it a lot. I went to seminary not to be ordained, and I am not ordained, not to become a biblical scholar, but because I wanted to continue the work I was doing in religious nonprofit and have deeper theological understanding. As it turned out, in my third of my 4 years in seminary, my spiritual director at the time was the prioress of an Anglo-Catholic convent in Oxford. And basically, she taught me how to pray in a deeper way than I had known how to do. And out of that year of working with her, I had a rather sudden recognition of a calling to teach. I had no intention of doing that at all, as I said. The reason I was able to do it, because at that point I was past 30, but I was able to do it because when I was 18, I went to Israel and studied at the Hebrew University in Jerusalem. And so my Hebrew was pretty good. And so I guess I need to distinguish between what led me to become a professional biblical scholar, which was a calling, and what enabled it, which was my undergraduate education.
Mm-hmm. Good.
What motivates me? What motivates me is that I I'm a Christian who takes the Bible seriously, and I feel that I am called to work for the church within the academy.
Wonderful, wonderful. We'll talk a bit more about that for sure. We'd love to hear your thoughts on that. So, what have been some of the greatest challenges that you've faced in your academic journey, and maybe how you've overcome them? Just a couple of examples of some of the hurdles that you've encountered.
They've all been internal. I've
Mhm.
had a very easy, my journey, the externals of my journey have been very easy. I've had four wonderful jobs. I've had great mentors and colleagues and deans at every place I've taught or studied. Um, my so the hurdles were in myself. I didn't want to be a biblical scholar. I didn't want to be a teacher or scholar, and I was afraid to do it. I'm quite introverted. I wasn't I wasn't brought up to have the kind of public role that a professor has. And so I warmed slowly to the idea.
Very good. I think that's something we can all relate to, is just so many of those internal struggles and hurdles. That's really helpful. So, in your time in biblical studies, how have you seen or experienced things change in the academy, either for better or for worse, or perhaps in both ways?
Well, I'm not going to judge for better or for worse because I think it's too soon to say. A very big change is the job market, the position of the university, especially uh, in my own country, um, and uh, and some of that. It's, as I say, it's simply too soon to say what that means, but those are very significant things. It is only within the last few years, and I'm sorry to say this, but I think I should say it, that I have begun to say to people, and my doctoral students, uh, they will have their degree from some of the best institutions in the world. And I say to them, you should have a plan B because there are not so many jobs. That isn't something that I needed to say, certainly 10 years ago, but maybe only 7 or 8 years ago did I begin to recognize I have to say that. Um, so, um, and so that's simply a fact of the institution. With respect to my particular field, the world of biblical studies, um, I would say it has grown much wider.
Mm.
Um, I think the Guild is open um, to a wider range of questions. Uh, that's reflected in my title. I'm Professor of Bible and Practical Theology. That was a title that was created at Duke for me. It didn't exist before, but it was to acknowledge the kind of biblical scholar that I am, which is not exactly a conventional professor of Old Testament, although I've had that title at three of my four jobs. Um, and and I would say that maybe implicit in that title is the fact that the Guild has become more open to the world. So my title is Bible and Practical Theology. That I think that questions of practical theology, the sort of so what questions, are much more present in the academy than they were when I began going to SBL 40 something years ago, or when I would be invited to give papers, usually on something about Pentateuchal studies, or just sort of what we considered the standard thing then. But now I think the fact that I have written 4 books on preaching, nobody particularly blinks at that now. When I first started in that direction at the SBL, people said, well, that took a lot of guts to speak about preaching at the SBL. I don't think anyone would think that now. So I think it's actually I see more integration between academy and world, including integration between academy and church.
Great, great.
Thank you, Dr. Davis. And you've already started to touch on this question of the connection between academy and church. So to pick up from that, one tension that many of us grapple with is the relationship between scholarship and spiritual life. Now, a key focus of your professional career has been in practical theology. So I'd like to ask a few questions related to this topic.
Okay.
First, how do you understand the relationship between your scholarship and your spiritual life? What is challenging and what is rewarding between the connections between the two?
So I have always taught in a confessional environment. I've taught in 2 independent seminaries, one an Episcopal seminary, one a denominational seminary, an interdenominational seminary, Union in New York. And I've taught at 2 university Divinity Schools, Yale and Duke. But always, while my appointment may have been as it is at Duke, I do a lot of work in the graduate program in religion, which is within the graduate school. That was also true at Yale. My home base is in the Divinity School. And so I have always been free to begin my classes with prayer. Not if I'm doing a doctoral seminar. I don't do that. Because not everybody, it wouldn't be appropriate for everyone in the class. Or right now I'm teaching a class that has undergraduates who are from throughout the university mixed with my divinity students. So I'm conscious of an environment in which there's not a single set of agreements about what we're doing here. At the same time, I have never felt in any place that I taught that I was inhibited from being who I am. And as I said a few minutes ago, who I am is a Christian who regards my teaching as ministry. I may not have said that before. And the place that I serve is a university. And to my surprise, I thought that I would feel most at home teaching in my own denominational seminary. I loved teaching in my own denominational seminary, but I have discovered that I actually feel most at home. It's going to sound a little funny, perhaps, being a churchy person within a university setting than being a more academic person within a more church-y setting, a more denominational setting. At the same time, there's a tremendous amount of integration because I've never taught any place that there wasn't daily worship in which I participated more days than not. I should say that especially in my early years of teaching, a tremendously important part of integrating those two was that I was living in New York City and I was beginning every day with the Sisters of the Community of the Holy Spirit, who were just a 5-minute walk down the road from where I was teaching at Virginia Seminary. And so spending an hour or two at the beginning of each day in the convent actually kind of rooted me in certain ways that then, when I wasn't living a 5-minute walk from a convent, I had internalized some of that. But it was really critical at the beginning. And I still maintain very close relations with religious communities, both monastic and the Bruderhof community, which is a Anabaptist community that is, and I find that being closely connected with intentional Christian communities is a sort of helpful anchor to me, reminding me why I do what I do.
That's great. Thank you. And you've already kind of addressed this a bit, but with this integration, I'm curious if you have other like practical ways in which you've been able to kind of do this to bridge this gap between academia and the church in your own life.
Well, for many of my years in seminary, and I was at 2 different seminaries in my own country and in England. For all of those years, I was at morning and evening prayer Compline, so my life was punctuated by daily services. I've largely maintained that practice in my years of teaching, so I am very, very frequently in worship services at the places where I teach, and to some extent, more widely in the community. So once a week, I worship at my local synagogue, saying morning prayer, because I like praying in Hebrew, and that's the only way I can do it. And also, they say prayers that are very instructive for me as a Christian or we say prayers, but that are instructive for me as a Christian to overhear, because some of those prayers are written against the background of the Crusades, for instance, and they remind me of my own history, which is in some ways a shameful history. And I'm privileged to be welcomed into a community that prays daily for the preservation of the remnant of Israel. And my community represented the threat to that remnant. So that's one thing that I do. And maybe that's, and I guess I would also mention that I write for the same people that I teach. And I also write for a wider audience of interested people who do not share my same education, either at the seminary level or at the graduate school level. And so that, I do write some guild-oriented pieces, but most of what I write is aimed at a broader audience. And I think, and I try to bear both communities that use the Bible, so church and synagogue. I try to bear both of them in mind when I'm writing. Sometimes I'm writing for a distinctively Christian audience when I'm writing on preaching. But even so, I try to be mindful of Jewish interpretation because there's a long history of erasure of Christian interpretation and a failure to recognize that that Jews have been doing theology as long as Christians have been doing it, and in as great sophistication. So I just spent the last hour studying with a rabbi who's actually asked me. I'm doing a directed study for him for his own doctoral work. And that just kind of reminds me of the larger context of the church's life, and of the burden that we have that comes from 1600 years of erasure, canceling, as we now say, and often active persecution.
That's very helpful. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And I'm also curious, as a practical theologian, what area or areas would you say are least engaged and perhaps overlooked or dismissed in biblical scholarship?
Well, actually, I think this is an area for celebration more than lament. Related to what I was saying earlier, that I think that a wider range of questions are engaged and wider audiences it's considered legitimate to engage. And I think there's more engagement, thinking of things that are close to my heart, more engagement with the arts, and more engagement with preaching. People no longer seem to think that's a strange thing for a biblical scholar to do. An area in which I haven't seen as much growth as I had expected has been interaction with other communities with whom we share directly and less directly large elements of our tradition or traditions. And so I'm teaching a class right now with the director of Muslim life at Duke on reading Bible and Quran in conversation with each other. And I've been maybe a bit surprised through the years that I did not have more colleagues in various fields engaged in joint teaching with Jews and Muslims, which is not actually, well, I was going to say it's not a difficult thing to do, and it's not, if you don't mind teaching or being in the front of the room talking about something you don't know much about yourself, which I don't mind. As long as there's somebody in the room who knows more about it than I do. So I don't mind learning alongside my students. It is the case that I've been very, very fortunate that in my several jobs, I have never taught in a place where there was not a very substantial and welcoming Jewish community. So I've always been able to share teaching with Jewish colleagues. And over the last 20 years, I've been very fortunate also in being able to do teaching with Muslim colleagues. And it isn't true in every community that one would find such partners available to teach. So that's part of the reason more people don't do it, but I'm not confident that's the whole reason. I would say, and one other thing that's been welcome to me, I think there is much, much more engagement with ecological issues, relation to non-human creation, including the land on which our lives depend. When I first started teaching in that area now, about 35 years ago, more, that people weren't generally doing that. And that was a case in which I was in the front of the room talking about something I didn't know anything about, and there wasn't anyone else in the room who knew more about it than I did. But I probably, when I started teaching on that at Yale Divinity School, I probably had in my class everyone at Yale who'd ever been on a farm. And gradually, as I've moved further south, I've had students with much more rural experience than I do. And so I've been able to learn from them, with them, and expanded my own circle of acquaintance. And the happy discovery for me is that people don't think that's a crazy thing for a biblical scholar to be doing. And really, I've never encountered that. And because I think that people pretty quickly saw that the Bible had gotten there a long time ahead of us. Or, as my doctor father used to say, Brevard Childs, insights get lost. And so probably there's never been a community of readers or a generation of readers of the Bible so far removed from the mindset of the biblical writers as we are. So,
Well, thank you.
Thanks for all those insights, Dr. Davis. I'd love to hear a little more about your research and writing. Can you give us a picture of how you approach the task of research and what the research process looks like for you, and maybe what you enjoy the most about it? You've talked a little bit about a couple of times teaching on something that you say you don't know anything about, and so maybe you could share a little bit about how you start to learn and research that topic so you can know something about it.
So I never write a book on anything that I haven't spent quite a lot of time teaching on. And as I've said, I've been fortunate. First of all, I think I've been exceedingly fortunate to be able to teach to have my main job in several different places. And I've also been fortunate in that I've done quite a lot of teaching in other institutions, some in semi-regular ways, but that were not my main place. So I've done quite a lot of teaching in East Africa, for instance. And that has really informed my mindset, especially in thinking about land issues. Probably almost all of my teaching and research that leads to writing has something to do with friendship. So I do a lot of joint teaching, as I've already alluded to. If I don't know something about what I'm teaching, then I usually teach it with somebody else. And sometimes most often, I guess I would say, we know different things. It's not that one of us knows a great deal more than the other about the same things, but we focus our attention in different ways, and that I find to be enormously rich. It's probably one of the reasons I have been able. I'm 75 and I still like teaching. And I think if I had been doing it as this kind of solo thing, I probably would have burnt out or lost my confidence at some point, but there's always something fresh to do. And I just, as I say, I teach with my friends, and so it's fun. And I've never found teaching with someone else more work. I've always found it, if not less work, I've found it more motivating. So that's probably the thing I like best. And also, and this is kind of implicit in what I've said, when I am teaching something that I've not worked on before, I accept whoever wants to hear about it, I agree to talk about it. And so I learn lots of things, especially when I was writing the book that became Scripture, Culture, and Agriculture. I didn't know anything about that, but I knew it was important. And I knew that the two parts of the world that I knew best, which were the San Francisco Bay Area, California, and the land of Israel, I knew that both of them had changed in my own lifetime and memory to a degree that was hard to fathom. And that was really what alerted me to the fact that I needed to be thinking about our relationship to place and land. And so I was fortunate to begin developing friendships with farmers who were, some of them who were also very well-known scholars or writers. So Wes Jackson, Wendell Berry, Norman Worsba, and they were as interested in what I knew as a biblical scholar as I was interested in what they knew as farmers, and so that was very productive, and mutually, it was fun on both sides, and remains fun on both sides. So that I think, so I would say that my research has a fundamentally communal dimension to it.
Yeah, collaborative. That's really great. That's very
Yeah.
insightful. You spoke a little bit about writing for different audiences and whether that's writing more academic work for the Guild or something that's broader. And can you share about how you approach writing for each of those audience, whether it's different or it's the same? And you've said that you mostly focus on a broader audience than just the Guild, and so maybe talk about how you. Is that what you set out to do, or is that just something that emerged from your career and ministry that's the audience you targeted?
Well, I didn't set out to be a writer. I set out to be a teacher.
Mm.
So it has surprised me that 3 of my 4 jobs have been at primarily research institutions. That's not what I would have envisioned at all. But again, it turns out you kind of do what you're called to do. And I've always liked writing, but I didn't see myself as an academic writer. I did see myself as a preacher, and that was from the beginning. And so it's the fact that I write for a broad audience is maybe not so surprising. I've really only written one truly Guild book for a Guild audience in my own field, and that was my dissertation. And nothing else has really been fit into that niche. I'm not super enamored of the footnote. They have their place, and I've written my fair share of them. But it's, that's, some people like that better than I do. I don't dislike it. I just, and I have, all 4 of my jobs have been in places with fabulous theological libraries and wonderful library staff. So that was just always fun to work in those places. And so I'm sure that's been part of what what has kept me going and encouraged me. I'm as I made a quite deliberate decision that I wanted to publish the books that I really, really felt I needed to do in order to feel that I'd not squandered my inheritance. I made a conscious decision to write those books by the time I was in my mid-60s, because I've known people who came to the end of their life and had postponed writing the magnum opus. And it actually, you all are a long way away from this, and the IBR students are a long way away from this, but it can make the end of a career, even the end of one's life, just a bit sadder if you didn't do what you felt you were meant to do, should have done, to pay your dues in a sense. And I don't mean pay your dues in a negative sense. I really do. I remember Brevard Charles used to pray, may we be worthy of what we have received. And so in order to give back some of what I have received, there were some books I felt I needed to write, including the biggest book that I've written, which is Opening Israel Scriptures. And I figured out when I finished that, well, anything else I do is gravy. So I can write totally frivolous books with my friends. And that's more or less what I've done and what I intend to do. And it's, and I like that. And I will also say that I'm kind of weary of my lecturing voice. And so I don't accept a lot of those. And I suspect if I'm weary of my lecturing voice, a lot of other people are too. And so I like preaching. I like being interviewed.
I'm
I
glad you
like
like being interviewed.
Thank you. I like having a conversation with a colleague, a public conversation. I do lecture. I gave the IBR lecture, and I was honored to do that. But even that came out of a conversation with Mary Bailey, who's the daughter of Wendell and Tanya Bailey. And the initial impetus for that was wanting to have a public conversation with her. That wasn't directly, that indirectly then led to the IBR lecture.
Well, Dr. Davis, you clearly have a number of interest and quite a variety. So is there anything that you're currently excited about, or new projects that you're working on or interested in, new areas of interest?
Yeah, I'll mention one that's not new, but has taken a new form, and one that is quite new. The new form is, I mentioned, I've done quite a lot of teaching in East Africa. I can't travel now to South Sudan, which is the place where I've done much of that. But last fall, the new Episcopal University of South Sudan asked me if I would teach a course in hermeneutics for them. And so I found myself teaching a course in a place where I have taught in person a number of times, but quite astonishing to me, I was teaching in a smart classroom in Juba, Sudan. And when I began teaching in that place 25 years ago, the idea that I would be able to teach online, it was nothing like I'm not sure we did any teaching online 25 years ago. I don't think we did, but that a place that I knew mostly using Iron Age technology, that I was able to teach a class in that setting without being there was amazing to me. And it brought together the church in my own experience, it brought together the church in the majority world. The church of the poor probably isn't within my own denomination a poorer church than the church in South Sudan. And that I was able to continue to serve them with limitations in my own health that I didn't have 20. That was quite remarkable to me. And to see that we understood each other. This always astonished me when I was in East Africa, that people whose experience was so drastically different from my own, people that one might say had been underserved educationally, that we were able to have a rich interaction, and in working in hermeneutics and exegesis and moving from text to sermon. I regard that as something close to miraculous, that can happen. And that we all felt that something genuinely transformative had happened. And again, that was something I probably could not have done if I hadn't 25 years ago spent quite a lot of time in that environment. So I kind of knew how to bridge the gap in certain ways. The new thing for me, again, working with people whose experience is very, very different from my own, is teaching in a medium security men's prison near my home here in Durham. And I'll be doing that tomorrow, actually.
Wow.
And that's a remarkable thing, because those men have a very, very different kind of both formal and informal education than I do. And that we can meet over text, and each of us learn things that we really had never thought about before. And I certainly learn much more from them than they do from me. And that there's that much, that the text makes so much room for all of us is, I think, quite remarkable to us.
Thank you.
And
That's great.
And that nobody has, nobody's the expert. We have different kinds of expertise. So when I was teaching the Joseph story, the first day, one of the men said to me, and he'd studied with me before, and he said, and this was an act of kindness, he said, "Now, Dr. Davis, I know that you are not you haven't just chosen this story because we're in prison and Joseph was in prison. That was, in fact, the reason I chose the story. But he said, but we know that that's totally insignificant. The important thing is that Joseph was in prison for a sex offense, and most of us are too. That's something I would never have known, something I never would have asked. And the generosity in opening that up for me was really amazing to me. And their trust in saying, okay, let's get serious here about, what's at stake as we engage this text. In different ways, we had that experience reading the Psalms together. Because, when you're locked up for decades, you read the Psalms differently.
Thank you. Wow. So it's incredible. So just to, I guess, kind of start to wrap up this
Okay.
conversation, I'm wondering, what do you think are some of the most important skills or disciplines for a young biblical scholar to develop today?
Hebrew and Greek, there's no substitute for knowing the text really, really well. Um, and and as you know, translation is a very sort of a blunt instrument. And so if you can't read the text well in the original languages, then you just miss an awful lot. And I would say, and this actually goes back to my seminary education, something that my pastoral theology professor said about um, people working in parishes. He said, you need to be able to speak more than one language. He didn't literally mean more than one language, although this was California, and I think now he would literally mean more than one language. But what he meant was you need to be able to speak in different ways to different audiences and people who don't all speak the language of the academy and have no particular wish to. So, um, and and something that was said to me in my first year, I think it was probably my second year as a doctoral student at Yale, which would have been my first year teaching those students. And I remember one of my professors saying, when you teach in a place like this, you need to get over the idea that you're the smartest person in the room.
Hmm.
And that was a really useful thing to get over in my second year as a doctoral student. Because then you're not afraid to say, when someone asks you a question, you don't have to make something up. You can say, I don't know, but I'll try to find out. And again, as the examples I've just shown you, how can I possibly know how the Psalms read in a medium security prison? How do I know how Leviticus reads in a South Sudanese village? Unless they tell me and why they care.
Well, thank you. So just as a final question, if you could travel back in time, so big one here, what would you want to tell yourself as a master's or a PhD student?
Well, the main things I held on to as a master's and PhD student were things that the wisest of my instructors told me, and it was really good advice. And so there's nothing that I would say, I wish someone had told me that. They did. But some of the things they told me were, don't be afraid of doing something big. Don't be afraid of doing something unconventional. Again, you have to consider the source of the advice. So, if it's someone you don't think is a highly responsible scholar, then the advice is probably not going to be very good. But if they are, then you should probably listen to it. And follow up the things you're most deeply interested in. Don't do it because the guild is most deeply interested in that. And as my adoptive father said, the single most important thing is waking up every day and thinking, this is what I want to do today. This is what I want to be thinking about. And that was true for me from the beginning of my study through my dissertation. So those things, trust your wisest mentors, and trust your own deep interest, trust what brought you to this place. As I said to you, I was not a young student. So I had a sense of what were my interests that were going to last. I didn't begin seminary until I was 28 years old. If I'd begun at 21, I wouldn't have had that perspective on my interests. Not the same depth of it. So.
Well, Dr. Davis, thank you so much. We do want to respect your time, and we've just thoroughly enjoyed getting to visit with you here this afternoon and just hear about your life and your experience and your joy and your calling and your work. So we just thank you so much. We trust it's been an encouragement to us, and we trust it will be so for our IBR student members. So thank you so very much for joining us today.
Thank you for preparing so carefully for it. It's been a pleasure. God bless.
Great. Have a good day.